Hello. Okay, we're gonna get started with you making sourdough. I thought I would start really quick just with like the basics. So whenever you hear or you read online, it says feed your starter. Feeding your starter just means that you're putting water and flour into this jar. I always have 2 to 3 jars going of starter, and I'm gonna explain why. So this is my main. This is like your mother. So this is my main starter. This jar always stays on my counter. You'll want to feed that about every day. You could go 2 days, but I would honestly do it every day. And you can feed it different amounts. So a lot of times I do 1/3 of a cup of flour and then like 1/4 of a cup water. There's different ratios online that you can find, but this starter, you just need to find what works for you. This starter is always on your counter. When I'm ready to make bread, I'm going to put 50 grams of this starter into this jar, and then I fed it 150 grams flour and 150 grams water. Stir it up really well. When I initially did that this morning, I made a line of where it went to, because the trick of knowing when to do your bread is your starter has to double. And so if you have a line at the top of where your starter is when you mix it, you'll know when it's doubled. I also put the time because it's gonna take you a little bit of time to just see how long it takes for your starter to double, and it's going to depend on the weather, it's going to depend on your ratios. Sorry. So I would always put a line at the top, and then I put the time, and I always label. Obviously, I'm using 2 different jars today, but I have another one of these jars, and I have more of these jars, so sometimes they're the same type of jar. So in the morning or whenever you are feeding your starter, so we're not talking about bread right now, your daily maintenance of this starter, what you're gonna do is pour off about half of it. Now, when you pour off, you're going to have another jar in your fridge that's discard. Discard is essentially flour and water. It has the sourdough in it. But you can use that in a lot of recipes. You can use it to make pancakes, waffles, anything like with flour and water, you can substitute it out, and there's a ton of recipes for discard. I didn't start keeping my discard for a little while because I felt like it was a little overwhelming. So if you want to just throw it away, that's fine, but you're gonna go through kind of a lot. And so I keep mine, but you'll discard, so that's what discard is. You're getting rid of it. About half of whatever your, about half of whatever your amount is. And so you want your jar to be about 1/4 or 1/3 full before you feed it. So after you feed it, this is where it was. So it got to about 1/2. Now this is my main jar. I'm not doing anything with this jar today. I already separated out starter into my bread jar. And so this jar is what I'm using today. This jar, what it's gonna do, it's gonna expand, it's gonna rise, get bubbly, it looks really healthy, but then it's gonna deflate. And so when it deflates, it's fine. Tomorrow morning, I'll stir it up, discard half, feed it again, even if I don't wanna make bread. But you can tell it's a healthy starter because you can see the bubbles. It's right, like you can see that it raised at the top. This is what it looks like. So that is a healthy starter. So that is another reason I recommend getting your starter from somebody else, because it would be very easy for me to like give 2 or 3 people starter even from one jar. So it's very easy to split off starter, and then you know it's healthy. You don't have to wait and put in the work. So if you can get your starter from a friend, that's the best case scenario. So that is kind of how you maintain your jar. You can use a jar lid like a normal one like this, but you don't want to screw it on all the way after you feed it, because if there's too much pressure in there, it could pop off. And then sometimes it does overflow. And so you wouldn't want to have a jar like this on. So I like to have something flexible, or I'll just set this jar lid on top of the jar without this. So it'd be like that. So that way, if there was too much pressure or something was going on, it would just go to the side or it would fall off. So those are kind of the basics. Feeding, what discard is, and then always mark the top of your starter after you discard. Okay, so to make your bread, what you need is a largish bowl. You're actually gonna end up needing 2, but you're gonna start with 1, and then you're gonna have your jar of bread starter. You need some water, and then you also need salt. You need flour, and then you're going to need a kitchen scale. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna turn on your kitchen scale and zero it out. Make sure it's on grams. So I'm gonna zero it out. And now I'm gonna just dump in the entire, sorry, it's not zeroing, the entire jar, okay? So there are different recipes where you measure out how much of your healthy starter you want. For this recipe, you just dump in the whole jar, which I do think is really easy. Okay, so next, so it's pretty much come out. I don't normally have to like scrape any out, but it like pretty much comes out itself. Okay, so I've got my starter in my bowl. The next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna zero out my scale, so it's 0 right now. And I'm gonna pour in 680 grams of water. And it turns out to be more water than you think it's going to be. So I have to get a little bit more. And you want the temperature of your water to be lukewarm. You don't want, or like room temperature. You don't want it to be too hot or else it'll kill your yeast and your bread won't rise. So I got a little bit too much water. So I'm just gonna dip out until I'm at 680. Okay, so I'm at 682, which is fine. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take, you can use your hand or you can use like, you don't really wanna use metal. I don't know if that's legit, but that's what I've always heard. Use wood or plastic, you don't really wanna use metal. And you're just gonna stir it until it's cloudy. This is what it looks like. Okay, so I'm gonna get it all cloudy. Now, I will tell you, if you're having a hard time getting your sourdough to rise, especially in the winter, because sourdough does best when it's in a warm environment, so sometimes like January, February, this would be a time that you would sprinkle a little bit of yeast in if you want to cheat a little, and that would be fine. I would say like half of a teaspoon, like a really small amount, and I've done that a few times, but this would be the step you would do that, but normally I don't do that. I don't put any yeast in. So it's cloudy. This is what it looks like. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna zero out my scale again. And I'm gonna pour in 1,000 grams of flour, which is a lot of flour. I've done the math of how much it costs me to make each loaf, and it's like $1.50, so it's really not much, but it does take quite a bit of flour. I'm gonna zero out my scale again. I'm gonna add 20 grams of salt. This is pink Himalayan salt, but you could just use table salt. So you want 20 grams. It's really important you don't forget your salt. If you forget your salt, your sourdough's not gonna taste good. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna use my hands to kind of mix my salt in with my flour. And then now that it's mixed in, I'm gonna take my hand like this and I'm going to kind of make like a drain almost. And I'm gonna go in a circle. And then I'm gonna work in all of the dry flour. And I'm gonna keep doing this. I'm just gonna work it all together until I don't see any more dry flour. And then I will take a break, a 15-minute break. We'll cover it, we'll leave it on the counter covered. 15 minutes, come back and we'll do a fold, and then we'll 15 more minutes, do a fold, and then it will sit overnight. And so that's why I'm doing it right now at 6:30, because this recipe, like, you would want to feed your starter about 24 hours before you want to be eating bread. But this recipe really is hands-off. And so that's why I like it. There's a ton of sourdough recipes out there, like a lot, but I like this one because I have to do just a couple steps, and then essentially it does all the work on the counter while I sleep. You can definitely get a sourdough fast, like have a sourdough loaf that's faster, that's ready faster, but it's gonna have you stand at the counter and knead and come back every couple hours and check on it. So I like this one because I can do these couple steps, go to bed, wake up, make sourdough. So, okay, so this is what my loaf looks like, and I'll scrape all of this off after I stop the video, but this is what it looks like. Okay, so it's sticky in some places, dry, and And again, I will, after I wash my hands, I will just put a damp cloth over this, let it sit for 15 minutes, come back. Okay, so this has been on the counter for 15 minutes. And so what you do now is 1 round of stretch and fold. So what you're gonna need is you're gonna need to have a cup of water, or just do this next to your running sink. And you're gonna dip your hand into the water. You're gonna pick up some of your dough and then fold it into the middle. Get your hand wet. You're gonna pick up, fold, pick up, fold. And the water's just gonna help your hand not get sticky and stick to the dough. Now remember, this recipe is for 2 loaves, and so during the next stretch and fold, I'll show you how I split it into 2 loaves. But for now, you're just doing 1 round of stretch and fold. So I went in the complete circle. So this is what my dough looks like now. And I'm gonna take my damp cloth and set my timer for 15 minutes. Okay, so this has been sitting on the counter for 15 minutes. What we're gonna do this time is the exact same thing, but then we're also going to split it into 2 loaves. You could leave it and then split it in the morning, but I have had mine it got too big. So I split it at this step now. So I'm doing my stretch and fold. And then what we're gonna do is I use this, I think it's called a counter scraper. I'm not totally sure what that's called, but you could use a butter knife. And mine's wet, so I have it nice and wet because it's gonna help it not be sticky. And I'm gonna go right down the middle of my dough, and you'll feel it kind of go through. And now I'm gonna flip it over and shape it into a ball. And you don't wanna work it too much. If you try to work it too much, you're gonna damage the gluten. And so you wanna be really gentle with it and not work on it too long. So I'm gonna put that into my second bowl. And now I'm gonna shape this one, flip it, and then shape. I need more water. I'm just getting too sticky. And then now so it's not perfect. It's not a perfect ball, it's just the shape. I'm gonna flop it in. And then I'll cover both of these, and in the morning, so I would say like 8 to 14 hours-ish. So I'm doing it at 7:30. I'll probably make my bread or do my next step around 9:30 tomorrow, so it'll be about 14 hours for me. But you could do it sooner if you needed to. So that was that step. You're done for the night. Okay, so next we're gonna put our parchment paper into our bowl. There are other ways to do this, but I find this is the easiest because then when your dough is ready to go into your oven, you're gonna be able to just pick up the parchment paper and set it in to your Dutch oven. I just have it in a bowl like this. Now I'm gonna show you 2 different ways that you can fold your sourdough because this recipe makes 2 loaves. And so a lot of times I'll do an artisan loaf, like the pretty, what you picture for sourdough. But you can also use the same recipe to make a loaf bread. And so I typically like to use the same recipe for as many things as you can, because that way you just don't have to keep track of them. And so I've used this recipe to make lots of different things. So today we're gonna be making bread, like sandwich bread, and then your sourdough bread. So I'm gonna start with the sourdough bread. Also, sometimes I'll just make 2 artisans and give one away. I would say that these artisan loaves will last in a Ziploc bag they're really best on their first couple days, but you can make them last. And then if you don't get through them, you just cut them up, put them in the oven, you can make croutons. So I definitely don't think it's ever a bad thing to have too many artisan loaves. So I wanted to mention about my sourdough today. It's not always this bubbly. So if your dough has doubled or has risen, but it is not this bubbly, it doesn't mean it's not ready. It's just, I don't know why mine's so bubbly this time. So this is what mine looks like. So that's about how big it is in my bowl. And then what I'm gonna do is, again, you're gonna need a cup of water, and you're going to be getting your hands wet, and then you're going to need to separate your dough from you're gonna need to separate your dough from the bowl. So I'm just taking my hand and I'm just gonna scrape it using my fingernails, which sounds gross, very gently, because we do want those bubbles, and even if you don't see bubbles on the top of yours, there's probably bubbles in yours. So I'm just gonna take my hand and keep your hand nice and wet so it doesn't get sticky. And we're gonna gently separate it from the bowl. Just keep rotating. Okay, so now what you're gonna do is your second type of fold. So I'm gonna get both hands wet. Then I'm gonna pick it up on my tippy toes. And I'm gonna pick it up like this. Now you're gonna wanna make like a U shape, and then you're gonna fold the ends into each other, like that. So you like fold it, and this is really important, you have damp hands. So now, see how my fold is on this side? I'm gonna do the exact same thing, but on this side. I'm gonna fold it this way. This side is not going to stretch as much as the first side did. And again, be super gentle. If you're pulling and stretching, your bread's gonna be more like, it's not gonna have the nice big sourdough holes. It's gonna be more like tight. So this is about how as stretched as I'm gonna get this one. And then again, I'm gonna fold it into itself. Now I'm gonna take my hand and I'm just going to shape it into a nice shape. I don't want to say ball because it's not technically a ball, but okay, so again, being really gentle. You don't want to pull and tug too tight. So this is my bread loaf. So I've got it shaped. This is about what it looks like. And I am just going to plop that into my parchment paper lined bowl. Now this is the part you can pause. What you'll do, this in your Dutch oven, that needs to be in the oven for 1 hour. It has, like, your oven's gonna be ready before it's ready to use, but that it's really important. It needs to be in the oven for an hour. So this goes into your refrigerator for 1 hour. What it does in the refrigerator is it's gonna help your bread have more of like a spring back, so you're gonna get the nice round loaf. That helps with this process. It's gonna also give it a really nice, like, I don't want to say sour taste, but it's going to enhance the taste of the sourdough to give it that 1 hour in the fridge. Now this is the part you can pause. If you did not plan your schedule how you thought you were, or something came up and you need to, like, you cannot make bread, do this step, the step I just did, which took me like a minute, before you pause, because then your dough might overproof and it might not work as well. So do that step when you need to do it, and then stick this in the fridge. You can leave it in there and then cook it later tonight, cook it at a time that works better. But when you put sourdough, same for your discard, when you're putting your sourdough discard or sourdough dough into the fridge, it's basically like pausing the process. And so I have had a little of a hard time knowing my timing on how long to cook it when I pause it for like an entire day. But if you need a couple hours or something, it won't make a difference. So this will go in the oven regardless for 1 hour. You can leave it longer if you need to. Now I'm gonna show you how to make your bread loaf. I'll stop this one, I'll start a new one, but I am gonna show you how to make your bread loaf. What you're gonna need for this is a loaf pan and some flour. Okay, so we are gonna make your sandwich bread now. So again, you're gonna do the same step of using water. You're gonna dip your hands in and you just use your nails to separate it really gently from the bowl. You're gonna use the same method if you were going to make like a sourdough loaf, like what we just made, if you wanted to make one of those with toppings. So I'll show you when you would do that. So you're just gonna flour your surface, and then you're gonna gently, that's the key, it's gently, or else you're gonna not have any of the nice holes. You're gonna gently place it on to your floured surface, and you're just going to stretch. So you wanna stretch it so it's kind of flat. Now, if you have made loaf bread before, this is the same way you make loaf bread with any other recipe. So like, you can find lots of YouTube videos on how to do this like shaping to make sandwich bread. Okay, so I have it spread out, no holes. Like, you don't want to spread it to the point that there's holes. You don't want to make it too hard. Now, if you want to make, like, let's say jalapeno cheddar sourdough, you would spread your jalapeno in cheddar, and then you would fold your ends in, shape it, and then put it into a bowl with parchment paper and put it in your Dutch oven. Now to make sandwich, so that is the time to do that. So this is how you would do that. Or like cinnamon raisin, there's really great recipes out there. You would do it at this, like you would do this step. I don't know if I'm making sense. Okay, but now we're making sandwich bread. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna fold in one side and then fold in the other side. And then I'm going to loosely just roll it up. And you don't wanna do it too tight or else the inside of your bread's going to be raw. And so you wanna loosely fold it up, and you kind of want to seal the different seams. Just pinching them closed. I've said it so many times, but be gentle. Okay, so now I'm gonna turn this over, and I'm just going to place it into a bread loaf. So, and I forgot to mention this, but I do like to dust the top of my sourdough and then the top of my sandwich bread with just a little bit of flour. I think it makes it really pretty. So I did that on the other loaf before I put it in the fridge. And then after, in 1 hour, I'll show you what to do to score it. So that means make like a slit in it so that it can expand in the oven, and then I'll put it in the oven with you. Okay, so this has been in the fridge for 1 hour. It doesn't really look different than when I first put it in because, again, the fridge kind of like pauses the process. It might look like it's sticking to your paper on the outside just a little bit. It's totally fine. Once you put it into the oven, it's gonna be great. So what this next step is called scoring. People do really beautiful designs on their sourdough using a little razor. I lost my razor, and honestly, mine were never beautiful. So I use kitchen scissors now. So what I'm gonna do is I'm literally just going to make slits at the top. You could do one line like that. Sometimes I do a few little slits. The point of that is so that your sourdough can expand and it doesn't get too overwhelmed. Now I'm talking to you right now, but normally you'll want to get your sourdough out of the fridge and get it into the oven as quickly as possible without it getting to room temperature. You want to keep it cold. So I am going to take my Dutch oven out. I'm going to pick up my sourdough like this, and I'm going to set it into my Dutch oven. And I'm going to put the lid back on. And put it in the oven. Now, when you see recipes, the recipe that I started following when I started making sourdough said 20 minutes, and then you take the lid off and then do 10 more. What I have found best for my oven is 22 minutes, and then anywhere from 8 to 10 for the lid off. I check it at 8, and sometimes I leave it till 10. If you leave it longer, you're just gonna get like a crispier bread, and so it's gonna have a thicker crust. And so it's just gonna be more like, you know, like Panera, like the bread bowl, how it's like a really thick crust. It's just gonna get more like that. I personally don't like that. My kids don't really like it. And so I don't let mine get a crispy crust, but some people really love the crispy crust. So we're gonna leave that in the oven. I'm gonna do 22 minutes. And then in 22 minutes, I'm gonna take the lid off and just set it on the side of the Dutch oven. So right here, I'll just put the lid right there. So the lid is gonna stay in the oven. Now, if you were doing 2 artisan loaves, that's what you would do. Okay, so if you are making 2 artisan loaves, you're gonna put your lid, so at 20 minutes, or for me it's 22, but at 20 minutes, you're gonna take your lid off the top of your Dutch oven and just set it on the side of your Dutch oven. So it's staying in the oven and staying hot for your second loaf. And then you'll let that cook 8 to 10 minutes, take that bread out, put in your second loaf, and then you'll have it covered. Again, you're doing the same thing. So you'll have it covered for 20 minutes, take off the lid, 8 to 10, and then both loaves will be finished. Now, because I'm doing sandwich bread, it's a little bit different. So once my timer goes off and that 22 minutes is up, I'm gonna take that lid out of the oven, let the Dutch oven, let the bread cook for 8 to 10 minutes. And then when that is finished, I'm going to put in my sandwich bread. I forgot to mention that your sandwich bread does not need to go into the fridge. It can just stay on the counter. So I have my sandwich bread here covered. It's just resting on the counter. what I will do is after I take out my Artisan loaf, I'm going to set my timer to, or set my temp to 375, but I'm gonna go ahead and put this in, like I'm gonna move it from 500 to 75, but go ahead and put this in. It's okay that it's not 75 yet. It's gonna help give it good spring, and so that means that it's gonna rise really well, and so, because it went from 500 to 75 while the bread was in there. So you're gonna put it in the oven. Your sandwich bread will be 375 for 45 to 50 minutes. And so at that 50 minutes, you'll just take it out. It'll be ready to slice like sandwich bread. So your timing is gonna be a little bit different depending on which type of bread. And I'll have that typed up in the document because I know it's a lot of numbers and temperatures. So good luck with your bread. I will show you when I take out my, take the lid off, and then I'll show you the end product of my Artisan. Okay, so your bread is done. Again, I got Great Value parchment paper and I'm not a fan. If you get the real stuff, you'll be able to just lift up your parchment paper and put it on, but the cheap stuff breaks. And so I'm gonna dump it out. And then a couple things are, you want to put it on like a cookie rack if you have one, because then it'll have the air circulate underneath. If you get a loaf, if you just put it straight onto like a towel, it might end up getting a little soggy on the bottom. So here's my loaf. Oops. Here, I'll see if I can pick it up. This is what it looks like. The other thing I was going to tell you was it is best, I know it's hard, but it is best if you let it set for at least an hour before cutting it. It's gonna help all the steam and everything work its magic inside of it. And then if you slice it at an hour, then it's gonna be ready to go. But I know that's hard to do sometimes. So now I'm gonna set my oven to 375 and put in my sandwich loaf.